Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Jamie Gass, Director of Pioneer Education. Welcome to our second webinar on this topic, Education Innovations, Microschooling Pods, and Homeschooling. Massachusetts is home to among the nation's best charter, Catholic, and voc tech school choice options. We also remain proud of our state-led K-12 education reform work, which was a historic success and led us to become number one in the country on NAEP, reading, and math. Nevertheless, the COVID pandemic and atrocious 2022 NAEP scores have awakened parents to the grave deficiencies in public school offerings. In Massachusetts alone, 37,000 students left the traditional public schools during COVID, migrating to charter, Catholic, voc tech, and homeschooling options. Across the country, it's the same story in state after state. Parents aren't happy with the public education their children are receiving. Increasingly, when they're able to, parents are picking school choice options, including homeschooling and microschools. Clearly, state and national trends are toward a wider variety of school choices with particular progress in homeschooling, microschools, and pods. Today, we think it's vitally important that policymakers cultivate and encourage other parent driven school choice efforts, which is why Pioneer serves as a convener for the next wave of educational innovators, including microschool leaders. We hope this webinar helps inform policymakers and educational entrepreneurs alike, and it's why we're so honored to share this afternoon's lineup. Amar Kumar, founder and CEO of KaiPod Learning. Kelly Smith, founder and CEO of Prenda. Jamie Dennett, Freedom in Knowledge Academy in Arizona. Heather Long, Wildcat Microschool in New Hampshire. Susan Zaid Safra, Flex Learning Academy in Florida. We're pleased to begin with Amar Kumar.
It's very nice to be here today. Thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone in the audience. I'd love to start today by talking a little bit about the pandemic's long-term effects on education. We all know that the pandemic was an incredible disruptor to every kid's education experience, but it also changed how parents see their children's school. Previously we were okay with looking at our schools as good enough or great. We looked at rankings, we looked at test scores, we trusted our neighbors. But now I think that how parents see that school has really changed, and they are seeing them, unfortunately, in many cases, as rigid environments that are inflexible or not really geared to the needs of their children, much more focused on the needs of the adults in the building. And a lot of these things are being talked about much more openly than ever before. Because once you see that, once you see your child's school isn't really serving your child the way you think it is, you can't unsee it. It's really hard to forget it. And so that type of a significant disruption to education has led to a brand new openness to alternatives. At the most recent data that's from earlier this year, 25% of all families were actively looking for alternatives, real alternatives to education. That's 12 to 13 million kids who could start to go to real alternatives. That number is the highest it's ever been, and it continues to rise. We've also seen very well documented the rise of trends such as homeschooling. The data shows that homeschooling is still 50% higher than it was pre-pandemic. And it's not dropping off like many thought a few years ago that it might. And for me, homeschooling is a really interesting canary in the coal mine for education and school choice. If you think about what it takes for parents to decide to homeschool their child, it's one of the hardest things that they can probably do, one of the hardest decisions they can make. You are choosing for one parent to not work or stay at home. You're choosing to extract the child. You're having to convince family, you're having to convince neighbors, you're picking a curriculum, you're creating lessons, you're finding co-ops and enrichment activities. There's a lot to do to homeschool your child. You do it because it's one of the most important things you can do. And so the fact that parents are willing to do this is a really interesting signal. And now there about 5% of kids nationally are being homeschooled, which may not seem like a lot. But nationally, only 4% of kids are in Catholic schools. About 6% of kids are in other forms of private schools. So we're on the same order of magnitude as Catholic schools or non-Catholic private schools. Only 7% of kids nationally are in charter schools. So we're talking real numbers here where kids are being homeschooled. And, a lot of people are skeptical about the ability of most people to homeschool their children. That's fine. But this number is not the strongest demand signal that we've had to date, that parents are taking control, and the lengths that they're willing to go in a way they never have before. And so we really start thinking about there is this huge demand for alternatives on the order of 10 to 15 million kids in the next few years. But where will that demand go? To serve 15 million kids, you're going to need 30,000 new charter schools. Never going to happen. You're going to need 30,000 new private schools. Never going to happen. You're going to need more kids in online schools. We know parents don't want that. So where does this demand go? This is where microschools can come in. Microschools, if you're not familiar, are small private schools where 10 to 15 students work with a passionate educator. It's the modern reimagining of the one-room schoolhouse. And so you can imagine thousands and thousands of these microschools coming up across the country. And these microschools are uniquely positioned for this moment. And I like to talk about it in four main reasons why. First, microschools are relatively inexpensive to start. Rather than millions of dollars of startup capital for a new charter or private school, you really only need around $10,000 to $20,000 of startup capital to start a new microschool. So more people can do it. They're relatively quick to start, on the order of months, not years. So you could have a lot more microschools launching this next fall rather than having to wait 5 years for them to get going. Number three, microschools are much less bound by regulation that can stifle charter schools or even private schools in most states. And fourth, most importantly for me, microschools are locally responsive. When they only need 10 to 15 students to break even, they can choose to specialize. They can choose to serve neurodivergent students or gifted students or African American boys, student athletes, musicians. They can choose to be responsive to the needs of their customers in a way that no large school model could. So there's a really wonderful moment that's about to happen where these relatively inexpensive, relatively quick environments can launch in all these communities and really transform education for the better. Now, there's a lot of skeptics who don't like the idea that anyone beyond a local city government should operate a school in a neighborhood. And to combat this skepticism, it's important to think about what is the role of the government? What is the role of the public sector when it comes to education? And it's not a clear answer. There can be a lot of sort of political debate. There can be a lot of personal opinions. I like to break it down into three categories: the role of government in regulating education, in funding education, and in delivering education. So I'd like to talk about these one at a time. When we talk about regulating education, this is around deciding the rules of the game, creating a level playing field. An elected public body is uniquely positioned to do this. Now, we don't want this public body to start determining what all the inputs are and really hampering innovation. We want them to start to set the bar for what outcomes we want as a society. And like I said, the elected public bodies are more uniquely positioned to set the bar and what outcomes we want, and then let new providers innovate to find the best path to get there. So the role of the public sector in education should be around deciding on the outcomes for what their citizens want and focusing on that when it comes to regulation. Number two is around funding. The government is unique in that it has the power to levy taxes and distribute taxes, and they can use those to pay for social goods. The government can use that power to ensure equitable access, right? Historically, that meant education funding all goes to one school in a neighborhood, goes to a conventional public system. Thankfully, this is starting to change across the country. If you haven't already, you'll hear about this concept of an education savings account, or an ESA. And 13 states have passed ESAs in the last 18 to 24 months, which essentially allow parents to direct their state tax dollars towards an education option of their choice. So if a family chooses not to send their child to a local community public school and instead chooses to homeschool them or send them to a private school, they can take a pretty significant chunk of their state tax dollars and use that to defray the costs of that choice. That is a great thing. And so 13 states have done this. Tennessee actually just started on this journey this week. The governor announced a huge initiative to launch a universal education savings account for every citizen of Tennessee. So this is all a wonderful first step towards a marketplace of innovative options, because one of the hardest things to do in education has been to create new innovative options because you were always competing with a free school. And when you were competing with free, it was really difficult to serve the full income pyramid. Now with ESAs, innovative providers now all of a sudden have a more level playing field to compete for students to compete on the basis of education outcomes and to serve all types of learners. So when it comes to funding as the second role of the public sector, it can really be used to ensure more equitable access rather than locking it into one system. And then that finally brings us to the concept of delivery of education. And I like to argue that unlike regulation and funding, the government is not uniquely positioned to deliver education. We don't look to our governments to run hospitals. We don't look to them to run our grocery stores, our gas stations. Why do we look to them to run our schools? And even if some mayors wish to run their own schools, that's fine. That's a local decision. But we must see those schools as one of many options in a vibrant landscape, in a pluralistic landscape, not a local monopoly that is to be protected. And so once you change that mindset that the government is not uniquely positioned to deliver education, and they may be one of many options, then again, you start to see an incredible amount of entrepreneurship and innovation coming up across the country. And in parts of this country that are much more open to new forms of delivery, you're starting to see entrepreneurs create these new options. And so building on this trend, one of KaiPod Learning's strategies is called KaiPod Catalyst. It's a microschool accelerator. So we help educators launch their own microschools in their own community. And the idea here is that more people need alternatives in their communities. And who better to start an alternative than an educator from that community? And so we want to help those educators through the course of a few months go from an idea for a school to launching that school. And we want to create a vibrant tapestry of options all across America with hundreds and then thousands of educators running schools across the country. And most of these entrepreneurs in the beginning will be in states that have favorable school choice policies, either from a regulation perspective or a funding perspective. They will be welcoming of new providers to deliver the education. And for us, those states are a real glimpse into the future. Being from Massachusetts, I hope Massachusetts will soon sort of adopt this kind of a framework. We're not quite on that pathway yet, but there's a real promise that other states are going to show the way on how you spur innovation by really deeply understanding what the government's role is. So that's just a few of the opening remarks I wanted to share today. And with that, I'd love to transition to the next part of today's webinar by introducing Kelly Smith. He's the CEO of Prenda. And if you don't know already, Prenda is one of the largest, if not the largest, network of microschools in America. And if there's one person in this country who's helped accelerate the microschool movement, it's Kelly. I consider him a mentor, a friend. When I was starting KaiPod, Kelly, you know this, but you provided me the encouragement and advice that I needed, for which I will always be grateful. And so Kelly's going to lead a panel discussion with some incredible microschool operators who've been bringing these innovations to life in their communities. So over to you.
Thanks so much, and thanks, Jamie and Pioneer Institute. Really this event. I'm excited to be here. Grateful for the opportunity to microschool. I want to second everything Amar just said. This moment in time and the role of government in facilitating this. I hope you're sitting there in the audience thinking about how you can be part of this movement. Look at these questions Amar's raising, because I think they're important. For the rest of the time, we really wanted to view an opportunity to see it action, look directly at microschools. So we're going to spend some time visiting with people that are running microschools, that are doing it action. So I'll quick myself, and then I want to get you to our panel where we'll ask some questions. And I'm getting a message. My audio is a little choppy, so I'm gonna see if I improve that. But in the interim, I'll just keep going here. Kelly, I started a microschool in my house in 2018, and I was laughing a little bit. Said, $10 or $1,000, and I think my microschool $0 at around kitchen table, and did it relatively within weeks. really with the intention of kids love learning. And that was really what it was about for me at the very beginning. This class of 7 kids and having pretty incredible additional outcomes, both in terms of the stuff that shows up on tests, but so their outlook, their attitude, their demeanor towards education. I got to see fires lit, and that was pretty cool for me. At that point, the question was, introduce more and more people to microschools. At the time, no idea that COVID was coming and it was gonna forever shift the education landscape. I had the idea that universal ESA policies working that was going to fundamentally shift the education landscape. And it's been a wild ride. It's an honor to be part of the story for people opening microschools. We added it up. Prenda's helped 1,000 people start microschools, and we feel like we're just getting started. Want to do more, lots more. So with that, let me introduce Heather Long in Haverhill, New Hampshire. She's running a microschool up there. This is the northern part of the state. Jamie Dennett, Glendale, Arizona, and Susan Zaid in Fort Lauderdale. So take your video off and unmute. You go on the horn, that order. So Heather, Jamie, then Susan. Please just share kind of a 3-minute overview on you and your microschool.
Great. So I'm Heather Long. As Kelly mentioned, I am in northern New Hampshire, and my journey with microschooling started with a pandemic pod, I guess. It was before I really knew what this concept of a microschool was. But I formed together with a group of a few other parents that were good friends of mine during the pandemic. We decided to homeschool our children and have them in a little pod. We hired just a local teenager to be our teacher to help guide the kids. We used VLAX, which is an online curriculum that was available to us. And then in the afternoon, the parents would take turns with spending time with the kids, and we would just get really busy with projects that we loved. So parents would bring different expertise based off of kind of our own skill set. It was never meant to be a thing longer than that year of the pandemic. And for some of our families that were involved, it was not. Like the kids went back to school. But for me and my own children, they loved the style of learning. They did really well. And it opened my eyes to a new way of learning. I had always kind of been set in the traditional school model. And with this pandemic pod, I realized, wait, learning can look a lot different. And we don't have to be inside your typical school building. So it kind of got my mind thinking, wow, I want something a little different for my own children. At the same time, I was working as a school counselor in the public school systems and started to feel frustrated with the amount of needs that I was seeing. I felt very much that I was always putting out fires. So I would have kids sent to me that were in crisis, that were struggling. I would kind of patch them up and I'd send them back to class. And I really wanted to get to the root of that cause. Why are these kids struggling so much? How do I make it so that not so many needs are there? How do I help these kids so it doesn't feel so overwhelming? Because it felt like I was in a very small school, but it still felt like with me as only school counselor, I could not meet those needs. And when I started to think about that, combined with seeing what was working for my own children, I realized that maybe what they needed was a different form of learning. Maybe they needed a smaller set-in. Maybe they needed a smaller teacher to student ratio. Maybe they needed more hands-on learning or more place-based learning or to be outside more. So around this time, I heard of Prenda. I went to a Prenda info session and fell in love with the model. So I decided to start my own Prenda microschool in December of 2021. New Hampshire really paved the way for me to make that so easy. There's a Recover and Bright Futures grant that was available to New Hampshire families, and it was meant to help students with learning loss after COVID. So students in New Hampshire, and this still is continued through the end of this year, are able to join a microschool tuition free. So New Hampshire has covered the cost through the grant for all of my students. So having that made it very easy in combination with Prenda and using Prenda as kind of my umbrella model to get started. I launched my microschool, I think I said in December 2021, and I'm going into my 3rd year. I am now up to 22 students, and I have 2 other teachers that we teach with. We run our microschools out of our homes. We live nearby, so we can kind of share students among both of our homes. It's been an amazing journey. I'm so happy I went down this path for both my own kids, for the kids we serve, and for myself.
Thanks, Heather. Let's go over to Jamie.
Hi, I'm Jamie Dennett. I'm here in Glendale, Arizona. So this will be my I am in my third year with Prenda. So I have a microschool that serves 9 families. I have 12 students. And much like a lot of people, I think I got started with microschooling because I was homeschooling. I was homeschooling my then third grader at the time. But we were very isolated and lonely. It was just me and him. And I have a Montessori background. And it's interesting, everything came full circle. So the first Montessori guide I ever was an assistant for, first time I ever did Montessori underneath, she was the one who introduced me to Prenda. And Prenda was a very easy segue. It's very similar to Montessori in many ways. So I got involved with Prenda. I now have 12 students, very blended classroom. I have second graders, third graders, fourth graders, sixth graders, eighth graders, serve many different kinds of children, some on the autism spectrum, neurotypical, neurodivergent children, all different backgrounds. For 12 students, we have a very diverse classroom here. First 2 years, I did my microschool out of my home. We actually have a classroom space this year. We're so blessed and excited to have that. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me and my school.
Perfect. Thanks, Jamie. And over to you, Susan.
Hello, I'm Susan Safra. I am the owner and founder of Flex Learning Academy. We're located in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I actually opened up 2016 was the year I started creating the school. So I was a little early before microschooling even really was recognized by anyone. I was the first one in Broward County, actually. My process of getting into microschooling, however, occurred over 30 years before that. I always struggled in school. I was an undiagnosed dyslexic student, and I wasn't diagnosed till I was 19. But I I always had issues with learning. I loved to read. I loved writing, but standardized tests were never my thing. And so, always in the back of my mind, I thought one day, if I owned this school, I would do it this way. And then, I ended up obtaining my bachelor's and master's in education and being a public school teacher in the traditional method. But I noticed that there were so many issues, so many problems with it. I was never a true believer in the traditional school. I always felt that there needed to be a change, and I was able to engage in some change for many years, but not to the degree that I knew it needed to happen. And then when my own children started to suffer due to the traditional schooling, I thought, okay, it's time. I need to open the school. So in 2016, I took a leap of faith and I opened up Flex Learning Academy, and we are essentially middle and high schoolers. So we graduate students, and they can go off to college or become entrepreneurs, or go off into wonderful careers. We start them as young as sixth grade. And we're an all experiential school. So we don't believe in homework or tests. In fact, we create all of our own curriculum. There was no Prenda back then to help guide us. I wish that there had been. It would have made things much easier. But we figured it out. And we grew from 4 students in 2017 to almost 50 students. Currently, and I believe we're at our max. We actually have a waiting list. Our students are wonderful. They're engaged, they're entrepreneurial, they're motivated. They love learning, but they love to learn through experiences, hands-on projects, Socratic discussions. And We're just really happy to be here. And thank you for having us to help present some of the information here about microschooling today.
Perfect. Thank you, Susan. So you guys here in New Hampshire, Florida, Arizona, this is obviously happening all over the country and beyond. Love to see it happen in more places. One of the things that kind of surprised me when
I was just getting started. In contrast to Susan, I did not have experience in a classroom or in education. I had come from a kind of a tech background. In fact, the way I even got interested in education was I was running an after school program teaching kids computer programming. And one of the things we would do in this, it was at the public library as a free program. I was there every week for 5 years. So I spent a lot of time with kids, and I learned through trial and error kind of methods that worked and methods that didn't work. And one of the methods that didn't work was standing and trying to deliver information, right? Anytime I would switch into lecture mode, I could just see the eyes glaze over, and I had become the teacher from the Charlie Brown cartoons, that nobody can understand because it's just like wah 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 wah. Um, then I started kind of experimenting with, well, what would this look like if it was driven around a project, right? So what if I gave you some prompts and challenged you, we called it challenge of the day, to sort of find a way to create a software application that would do something like this. And even though it was a learning stretch and there was lots of foundational knowledge that they had to sort of get through in order to accomplish the project, I found that these projects were incredibly compelling. Well, later, much later, actually, I discovered there's a whole body of research around this thing called project-based learning. Academics and researchers and educators have understood this for a long time. I thought I had like invented it or something. I, of course, had not, right? And it was kind of exciting, exhilarating to realize that part of what I was doing in my microschool, well, that was even in the after school program, but that translated into the microschool. Part of what I was doing in these settings was actually innovative pedagogical practice, learning approaches that are new or somewhat new. Some of them were decades old, but they were good ways to get kids engaged in education, and yet not widely. They didn't have a lot of traction in traditional settings, right? And so it was this kind of realization that a microschool environment can create freedom to do education differently. I've talked to all three of you about innovative learning techniques, learning approaches, pedagogical things that you guys are doing in your microschools that you're able to do because of the format, because the microschool enables that for you. So let's go have each of you go. This time we'll start with Susan, and then we'll go Jamie and Heather. Talk about some of those learning approaches that you're using in your microschool.
Well, our school is, as I said, is all experiential. So students are learning all day long by having experiences. We use a lot of Socratic discussions. So we teach students how to create their own critical thinking questions and then pose those questions based off of something that we've read. Or we use TED Talks, we use podcasts, we use videos, a lot of projects. In fact, in a couple of weeks, we're coming up to midterms, and instead of having a traditional midterm, it's a midterm project, and they have different projects for each class. And this gives the students an opportunity to really research and showcase their knowledge in unique and creative ways. And it puts the ownership on the student. One of the other things that we really employ is the presentation component. So not only will they create a project, but they will share what they've learned with their classmates, and then the classmates have an opportunity to provide feedback, to ask other questions regarding that. And it just creates for such a wonderful learning environment. We also do a lot of field trips. So for example, last year we had a barn class, and we took the students to different barns and farms and gardens where they learned about animal husbandry and gardening, and we did 4-H projects. We have about 15 different electives that we run every week, and the students choose specifically what they want to learn in those electives. We do everything from home economics to entrepreneurship, where they have their own businesses. A couple weeks ago, in home economics, they learned how to change diapers, and a couple weeks before that, they learned some sewing. So everything is learning through experience, and then I think even one of the more prevalent things that they may learn from is even about failing. We always tell the students that FAIL stands for first attempt in learning, and that they need to fail in order to learn. And so that's also part of our process. even the way that we discipline the kids is Socratically. So again, all experiential and lots of student ownership.
Thanks, Susan. Jamie.
Yeah, a lot of similarities with Susan. There's some really cool things that you do there, Susan. So my microschool is mastery based and inquiry based, much like Susan's is. Lots of Socratic influence in my classroom as well. So my students with their core subjects, so your math, reading, writing, and language, they're working digitally actually with learning tools. And they're mastery-based learning tools. So it's all independent. My students work through this. And they love their learning tools. They're very engaging. And the tools provide me with data so I can see how they're doing, and lets the students stick with the subjects for as long as they need. So nobody moves on until they're ready. They can practice it as much as they want, hence mastery-based. We're also very inquiry-based. So my students are constantly doing projects, science experiments, social studies projects, constantly creating things. This year, my 2 second grade girls, they actually built a working raft out of water bottles. So recycled water bottles, and they actually put their small dog in it in a swimming pool. It works. So like things like that. Collaborative math, we're always doing collaborative math. This year, we're really focusing on productive struggle and how it's okay to sit with math problems for weeks, months, years at a time, learning how to work collaboratively with things like that. I have 2 6th graders this year who figured out that, wow, math doesn't have to be this isolated thing that we do independently, and they've decided to work together on their math, and they're doing it as a team, and they're like, wow, this is so much easier when we're not isolated islands working through math. So Socratic, lots of Socratic influence in my classroom. I've really embraced this year. It's very much a part of the Prenda pedagogy, Socratic discussion and debate. But this year I've really embraced it, really getting into answering my students' questions with a question, so that they're not becoming reliant, because oftentimes like students become reliant on the adults, like, hey, they ask a question, what is the answer to this? And we give it to them, right? Like we're just filling that old adage of filling the empty vessel with knowledge. And it's like, no, like they can find these answers themselves. So they'll ask me a question and I respond like Socrates with a question. We do lots of field trips like Susan. Need to get out there and experience the community. This year so far, we've gone to art museums, Native American history museums, did some volunteer work. Like Susan, we also celebrate mistakes. My students know that with mistakes, that's where your best learning comes from. So we make a big deal out of mistakes here.
Amazing. I said something stupid a minute ago about these innovative learning approaches being relatively recent. You guys are both talking about Socrates, who lived 2,400 years ago. So yes. I take it back. Some of these are, just because they're not widely implemented in traditional classrooms does not mean that they're new. These are old, time-tested techniques. Heather, I'd love to hear about learning approaches in your microschool as well.
Absolutely. So some very common approaches, as Jamie and Susan have. We use self-paced, mastery-based learning, digital learning tools when it comes to our math and ELA programs. So the students work independently. And again, those are great. The students are able to work at their own pace. They can take their time. They can move ahead. We use CTC math for many of our students, which I love, because the students can start with an assessment and then only do the lessons that they need to. So if they've already proved like, hey, I learned this, they don't have to kind of waste the time doing that lesson anyways. So they're really working based off of where they need to be. And they really enjoy that. And I think they feel empowered by that. Outside of that, we do a lot of project-based learning as well. If there's 2 things that I've really learned works for our students, it's having a purpose and it's autonomy. So as far as purpose, when we're really jumping into a project, if there's a clear purpose of why we're doing it and a purpose at the end of who are you going to present this to, who are you going to share this information with, our students are very engaged. We have times where we forget this, right? And we'll say, hey, we want you to write this paper. And they're like, well, why? Well, just because we said so. it never works. We usually ended up ripping up those papers and say, whoops, we did that, traditional school thing. We know that doesn't work for you guys. And we start over and we go back to letting the kids have some choice in what they want to say or what they want to do. A recent project we did that was pretty cool is we have signed our kids to be up to be part of the first Lego League. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar. But the kids get robots that they code. They have to build different Lego modules and complete these challenges. And then they go to this day where they compete against other teams to see how many challenges they can complete. But within this, they also had to complete a project where they had a presentation and they built a model. So there were so many different pieces of learning that went into that. There was a collaboration of working as a team. There was learning the coding skills. There was a presentation piece. And thinking back to this, when we went into this project, me and my co-teachers, we don't know coding. We have no skills. We have no ability to help them. So it was really cool because we could not teach the kids. The kids could not rely on us. They had to figure it out for themselves. And I think that works great. I almost like that we didn't know because it made it so the kids really had to have that autonomy. And that's something that's really changed in my mindset a lot. I used to think, well, you have to really know something to teach the kids. And no, you don't. The kids can teach themselves. You just have to guide them and help them get there. And that's what I want for our children. I want them to become critical thinkers. And that kind of plays into the autonomy piece. My goal for my students is that by the time they're entering into high school, that they're pretty self-reliant with their own work, that they can make their own choices, that they kind of have a menu of options that they want to look at as far as how they want to learn the different skills, but they can develop that plan and they can be in charge of that. So those are kind of two big goals. Another kind of fun thing that we do within our microschool is we have a forest classroom. So I really believe in using what's available to us nearby. So we do not live in a city. We don't have museums. We cannot do a lot of field trips. So we get out into the forest. We learn a lot of survival skills. We have learned to start fires with flint and steels and how to build forts and build shelters, which has been great. And again, so many skills that the children are learning when they're outside in the woods.
This is amazing. I hope I can speak for all the audience when I say, like, I want to go to your schools, all three of you. It sounds so awesome and fun. Thank you for sharing a little bit more about it. I want to drill into kind of two quick points. One is technology. I kind of heard this show up a couple of times, and the other one has to do with educational progress. First, Jamie, will you just share a little bit about how technology kind of fits in? It feels to me like a very human experience. It's not really like a tech thing, but there's somehow technology is kind of supporting or enabling what you're doing. Can you give people a little picture of what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, everyone's very aware that we live in this digital world now. Even, the world is so different, even from, when I went to school, and I feel like it wasn't that long ago, but we have so much access to information nowadays, like it's at your fingertips. And Heather kind of mentioned this, how like you don't need to know everything. You don't have to be an expert in something to teach it. And that's partly because of the technology that we utilize. So it's not, my classroom is not kids sitting in front of their computers all day just zoned into their learning tools. It's not like that at all. It's very collaborative. And yeah, technology doesn't have to be a bad thing. I think a lot of people think technology, oh, it's just screen time. But my students, they're very savvy researchers. And anytime that they have a question, so this Socratic environment of my classroom, we actually have a question wall. And when kids come up to me and they have a question, and I always say, that's a very good question. Let's put it on the question wall. And it goes up on the question wall and it just sits there. And I actually got this idea. It was from a book I read. I think it was Raising Critical Thinkers by Julie Bogart. So the question sits there and it's stimulating, this want and this need to know. And we've had some amazing learning come off of this question wall, because my students will finish their core subjects and they'll go to the question wall and they'll dive in and they'll answer these questions like, what is paint made of? Where did humans come from? Like, I mean, our question wall it spans the whole spectrum. And we have access through technology to find these answers. The students do it themselves. I don't give them these answers. They find it, they present it. And and with their projects, as they're diving into science experiments, doing a social studies project, building a model. My 6th graders right now are building a model of an atom of magnesium. They have access to all of these things right at their fingertips. And when I have to help my students, if they're really stuck and they need some guidance, like those tools help me too. I don't have to be an expert in everything. Our learning tools give us like real-time feedback. So like I sit there with my students and we're learning it together, and I'm guiding them to find their own answers. And the learning tools are giving us real-time information and feedback on what we're doing. So it's pretty incredible. We're also starting to explore AI in our classroom starting next week as well. So that'll be,
Wow.
my students are super excited about that.
I'm excited to hear how it goes, and I've got some questions for your wall when
Sure.
maybe we could sync up afterward.
They'll find the answer for you. I've learned
no,
so much from that question wall.
I will say, and people like roll their eyes at me because this sounds, it's like one of these trite, like children are the future kind of expressions that some people can feel empty about. Like I have told this directly to kids, and I mean it, is like, you guys are actually the hope for this planet. Like you can solve hard problems, and you know, we need you to. So please practice doing what you're doing. I want every kid in the world to be engaging in discussions like these, because then when the stage is bigger and we're talking about solving hard social problems and technical problems and all these things, they'll get there. So little interlude speech there, but let's get back to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, an example with that really quickly, we attended, Prenda does virtual expeditions for the students, and we attended today, and one of my students presented, and the leader of the virtual expeditions was like, hey, you made my job so easy, because my student who was presenting, like he has like YouTuber experience, and he knows how to Zoom and screen share, like he knows all this, and he like, the virtual expedition leader was like, I didn't have to do anything. You already had like the whole presentation there. So like children like today are digitally, like they know it. They know the digital world. They're very good at it. Usually when I have like tech problems, you know, and I need somebody to come fix my computer, I'm calling on my students. So they know this world.
It's beautiful. Heather, will you talk a little bit? You mentioned some of how you're using some of these tools for mastery and adapting to them. I mean, one of the questions that comes up a lot when people think about a microschool or doing really anything different, it's like, I know what a report card is. I want some sort of sense of like, kids are moving through. I don't think they think too hard about what the letters on the report card mean. It's sort of like, you sat in the chair for long enough time and you turned in enough homework. You know, talk a little bit about how you're thinking about achievement or academic progress, and like what does that look like in conversations that you have with your parents and things like that.
Absolutely. So at the most basic level, if we're looking at academic progress, you know, we're looking at how are they doing with their math, how are they doing with their reading and their writing. And for us, we have our programs, since they are mastery based, the students don't move on until they've mastered a concept. So it's really easy to say, okay, yep, they've mastered the skill, they're going to move on. I have pretty high expectations when it comes to that. So like, for example, for our math, students have to score a 90% on a lesson or better, or show mastery. So, you know, it's not like, okay, we got a 70, let's move on. They have to know that skill and really demonstrate that they know that skill before they move on. We also use iReady assessments. So we do an assessment 3 times a year, so we can look at progress over time for our students, which can be really useful. Now, I kind of say that as the most basic level because I look at learning as so much more than that. You know, like I talked earlier about that autonomy piece. One thing I'm really looking for in my students is that they have a level of autonomy, that they can do hard things, that they can work through those, that they can figure it out, use some critical thinking skills and show that they can do it on their own. And now that's a tough thing to measure. There is no tool that we can say, hey, sit down and do this test, that's going to give us some kind of scale for that. So we do a lot of observation. I have a lot of conversations with my students and with the parents and with my other co-teachers about where students are and how we get them to that place. You know, and I think having the students involved in that conversation is really important. So, you know, a lot of times I'm very upfront with my students and just saying, look, where do you think you are? You know, Prenda has kind of this V of autonomy model where we talk about the top of the level of autonomy is they have a lot of freedom, and the restrictions are out here, right? They don't need a lot of support. Where at the bottom, they need more support. And I'll ask the kids, where are you? And of course, they want to be out there at the top. They're up here. And I'll just say, no, I think you're right here. But like, how do we get you towards there? So it's a lot of conversations. It's hard to measure. But similar to what I think you're getting at, Kelly, I've had people ask, well, how do people know you're doing a good job? Like for me as my role, how do people know that your kids aren't just playing all day? And how do you know that these kids are learning and they're teaching? And I go back to, I am accountable for my parents. So I work very closely with my parents. I want them to be involved. And if the parents do not feel like their children are making the growth that they want to see, they're going to pull them out of my school. And that growth might be different. Some parents might be really looking for a lot of academic growth, and other parents might be looking for growth in other areas. I have one parent I just talked to, and she's like, I want my child to be able to do hard work without giving up. So for her, that's the measure that she's looking for. So it might be different for every kid. And I really think that parent accountability piece is huge for me. We had almost 100% retention rate this year from last year. We had one student move out of state. And I think that says a lot of, this is working. Families are happy, kids are happy, they want to be here.
Beautiful. Thank you, Heather. Susan, I'm going to surprise you. I didn't give you this one in advance, but this is a real situation happening in our life. A close friend of ours is having a bullying issue. Their 8th grader had a literal rock thrown at his head. This is in one of the bigger junior highs, like public school situation. And it's just so heartbreaking to watch the parents kind of suffer through this. These are friends of ours. Can you talk a little bit about just the vibe in your microschool, the kind of the environment itself, and the way these kids interact with each other?
Sure, absolutely. And we have a zero tolerance policy for bullying. In the past, students who have exhibited that type of behavior have actually been asked to leave our school. After, of course, we've worked with them to a certain level. But I think that in today's world, students or people in general are not given um, good communication skills, different outlets to be able to deal with their own personal issues, and then how to relate with others. So one of the foundations actually of Flex Learning Academy is something that we call present moment awareness. We do a morning meeting with the students where we have them literally get into the present moment, and it teaches them how to focus their attention and to redirect their attention. And instead of having the attention in their heads, thinking all these thoughts, getting their attention out and being here with us. And then, of course, we always pose Socratic questioning and, getting to the bottom of whatever the issue may be. And we give the students a platform and a safe space to share their feelings about whatever is going on, so that we can help them to find solutions. Again, like the others have said, our goal is not to tell students what to do. We don't give them the answers, but we do provide them with tools like present moment awareness, communication skills, and so on, so that they can solve their own problems. Because what's going to happen in the real world when they do leave our school eventually, when they do graduate from high school, they have to know how to work with others and other people that they may or may not like. And so I think that that's all part of the experience. And one of the greatest benefits of having a micro school is that you have a small enough environment where you can teach these skills to the students, and they're not getting lost in the shuffle. Listen, I taught in public school systems where I had 42 kids in my classroom, my English class. And the majority of the time you're spending disciplining some of the students, and then the really nice, sweet kids aren't getting what they need. So I think that it's really having good communication skills, and not just training the students, but also my teachers. So my teachers have been trained in the Flex method on how to handle situations and how to help students go through the process of having these conversations and working through some of the issues that they're having so that the bullying doesn't happen.
Thanks, Susan. I appreciate that answer. And I can only imagine as a result of that deliberate nature, just the interactions and the environment that you've created there with your
Yeah.
students.
We also do in the mornings have them create an intention for the day or an intention for the week. And so, and then we uphold those throughout the week and make sure that they are, accountability. And so I think that that's a big part of it as well. So students who may be struggling with anger or with frustration at certain levels, creating the intentions that they're going to speak out more, they're going to seek assistance. They're not going to get as angry. They're going to get their attention out of their head. I think those are some positive things as well that they can do.
Amazing. Well, I think you guys know Pioneer Institute. It's hosting this webinar. Is kind of focused on policy. This microschool movement is relatively new. It's fresh. It doesn't show up baked into legislative codes in the various states. There's not a lot of rules that are at least designed or carefully designed with us in mind, the way we're doing education. And I would love if you each, and we'll do it as a lightning round, if you could each spend about a minute just kind of sharing, if you were sitting in the room with the people writing the rules, right, the laws, the regulations around this, what are some of the things that you would want to see? What are some of the things you would not want to see? And maybe we can discuss a little bit back and forth here as we wrap up. We'll start with Jamie Dennett, and then we'll go to Susan and then Heather.
Okay. Policy. I think I've been thinking about the whole how this works with my microschool and policy, how it affects my microschool. And I think, I'm not sure if this answers your question, but I do have to say, I've been in education for over 20 years now in some capacity. Most of that has been with Montessori education. And my dad always told me, he's like, you need to start your own school. You need to have your own school. You need to have your own business. And I was always like, yeah, right, Dad. He was a small business owner. And I never wanted to have to deal with owning a small business is hard, right? There's a lot that goes into it. And I do have to say that if it wasn't for Prenda Microschools, I could speak almost certainly that I would not have started my school. Prenda made it so easy for me and my students to be here, kind of as that middleman. And also the ESA funds made it possible for all of my students to be here and for just to retain all my students and for all of us to go to school here. It was because of ESA. So
thanks, Jamie. Susan? I think we're running out of time, so do a fast version.
Okay. Regarding policy, some of the obstacles that we have faced have been regarding finding a space that is suitable, that the government will allow us to be in. We're kind of in that middle ground where we are a school, but we're not really a school. And so finding a happy medium. Also being able to use the school funds for homeschool. Because our microschool does allow our students to be registered as homeschooled students, and a lot of families do want to have that, but the school funds are not necessarily available to them as full-time students. I think that those are two of our bigger policy issues that we're seeking to rectify.
Awesome, thank you. And Heather?
Yeah, so I guess I can speak to the things that I think have worked well for me so far. And one of them is that our students are registered as homeschool students. So there's kind of a lot of freedom within that. And that has really helped us. The fact that I'm able to operate out of my home, so we're not subject to childcare regulations, has really, really been helpful. We have EFAs available to families. So when our grant funding through the state ends at the end of the school year, families can transition to EFAs, and that really helps. I would like to see that increased because right now it doesn't really cover the full cost of tuition. So to see that money be available to more families, because there's also restrictions, and to be increased would really help.
Anybody in New Hampshire listening right now, there's an open a bill coming for this legislative session that would really help support more of this type of education in New Hampshire. Great. Well, thanks to all three of you. I hope you'll all, it's not the raucous round of applause that you guys deserve, but we're all at home clapping for you guys. Thank you, each of you, for the work you're doing for kids in your community. Having done a little bit of this, not as much as the three of you, but being there in person with these kids day in and day out, it's not easy work. It requires so much of your heart and so much of your just energy and care. And it's work that truly matters for these individuals that you're serving, their families, and the whole world. So I think we can all join in thanking you. And thanks again to Pioneer and to Amar for the early comments here, kicking us off. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Jamie. I think there's a wrap up, but really appreciate the chance to talk microschools today with you all.
Yeah, and I want to echo that. Thank you so much, Kelly and Amar and all of you. I thought it was an excellent discussion. Really grateful for everyone's time and participation, and particularly grateful for all the great work that you are doing to empower parents and students to get the full experience that they can out of their education. This webinar will be available on YouTube. We'll make that available the next day or so. And of course, all the materials related to Pioneer's work is available on our website, pioneerinstitute.org. I hope everyone has a great holiday season, and we look forward to connecting with you early in 2024. Happy New Year.